in the heart of Central Texas, it's the Best of the Outdoors podcast. Brought to you by Texas Fishing Game Magazine, the voice of the Texas Outdoor Nation. I'm your humble host, Dustin Von Warnke, and man, am I excited to have you guys on this show today. We're starting the first part of our Saltwater series, and we're going to be doing a series throughout the new year, or just kind of probably in the first part of the new year, dealing with saltwater fishing, in this case inshore and surf fishing, and then we'll cover offshore fishing and a bunch of other saltwater topics in the future. And this series I'm going to be doing with Daryl Palmer from Double D Extreme Tackle. He makes extreme tackle rigs for big game fish and even inshore rigs and shark rigs and all kinds of different things. So he's a lot of fun to talk to, and a great interview. I've had him on the show before back in 2015 when I launched this podcast, before we were part of the Texas Outdoor Nation, and he's a great guest. I loved having him on the show then, love having him on the show now. We recorded this at the very end of December between Christmas and New Year's, so this is one that I've kind of had in the can that I'm letting out here in the mid to later part of January. And we'll probably rebroadcast this podcast again closer to March, when sharks start to be a big deal, because we talk a lot about shark safety, stingray safety, as well as safety around hardheads, gaff tops, so on and so forth, and some of the ways you can handle fish like that are quote-unquote dangerous fish that you can encounter in the Gulf of Mexico and the bay systems and inshore and surf fishing. So really enjoyed this podcast. Think you really enjoy it. We go a little longer in this episode than we do in some of the other ones, and but I really think you like the content. It's really solid stuff. So thanks so much again for watching, reading, or listening. Thank you so much for telling a friend about the show. Thank you so much for subscribing to the show. And also, I want to thank you for listening, because without you, the listener, we would not have a podcast. We would not be part of the Texas Outdoor Nation. We wouldn't get any sponsors. So you're the one that makes it all happen. And from the bottom of my heart, thank each and every one of you guys for tuning in every time we do one of these shows every 2 weeks. So anyway, here's my interview with Mr. Daryl Palmer from Double D Extreme Tackle. Joining me on the phone is Mr. Daryl Palmer from Double D Extreme Tackle, and loving to have you back on the show. Really excited to have you back. You were first part of the podcast when we just started this bad boy, and it's great to have you back. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, Dustin. I appreciate you having me on, man.
So tell us just a little bit of background about how you got into the fishing business, as it were, and what you do with Double D Extreme Tackle, and just kind of your background in fishing, if you don't mind.
Well, as a kid, I was, as many of us were, military, what they call a military brat. My dad was in the service. He was a Navy career counselor. And with that, we moved all over the place, all over the United States. I wouldn't say all over the world. The furthest I lived was Hawaii. That's where I was born. And I got the advantage of fishing, starting fishing young, about 4 years old, with my mom up in Rhode Island, and moving different places and doing different things, over the years. I got to experience a lot of different types of fishing, and then I served myself. I served in the U.S. Navy, and was stationed up in Great Lakes. So I got to experience some lake fishing, and I did steelhead, bass, muskie, northern, and I was, I guess, student of the fishing, not really industry, but a student of just those types of fishing.
Sure.
And so I gained a lot of knowledge over the years from different settings and different situations. So. As far as starting my company, I started it 10 years ago last month in November of 2007. And we had moved, my wife and I had moved to Texas to be closer to my relatives and my parents and that. So I started fishing down in at the Texas City Dike. And I'd go out and I basically got into red fishing and large drum and that, and using the gear that you could buy at the stores and the bait shops and stuff. A lot of times it didn't hold up, and I would lose good fish.
Right.
And finally, I was just like, you know what? I got tired of it and started building my own. And then my wife's like, people kept, started asking me, well, where'd you get this stuff? I'm like, I'm building it on my own. And they're like, well, let me borrow one, or let me have, can you sell me one? And after a few times of that happening, she's like, well, why don't you put them on eBay? And so I did. And the first month I sold probably a dozen. And in the first year, I probably sold a couple hundred, 300 rigs. And the rest is pretty much history.
That's great. That's wonderful. And the claim to fame that you have with your rigs is what?
They don't break.
Right.
They're as strong as the material they're crimped on. I use a combination of monos and cables. I don't use wire because it's hard on the fish and hard on your hands. But as far as the monos and cables go, with a 90-pound rig that I manufacture now, and then as well, but I can take and straighten out an 8/0 J hook. I must add 8/0 J hook.
That's pretty good.
And with a 275 rig, I can straighten out a 14/0 circle hook. And that's single crimped. So.
Wow. And you crimp everything yourself by hand, which I think is just amazing. Your hands got to get tired after a while, I guess, huh?
It does here and there, but it's I've got it down to pretty much a science. So
that's cool.
In the last 10 years, having several thousand rigs go out the door, suffice it to say I've got a little experience crimping.
Yeah, we talked about that on the last show you and I did. That's really funny. And so that's really great. What I wanted to get into this show with, and you and I talked about this in our pre-chat, is, redfish, black drum, small to medium, large sharks, inshore, and surf fishing. And we've done a podcast before with Marcus Heflin, who is Surf Fishing Santa, that we did, I guess this has been several episodes ago. And he was a really great insight of, he has a fishing ministry, much like the one I'm part of, that, he wades out in the surf and that kind of stuff. But we didn't really talk about brass tacks and gear like I wanted to with this show. I kind of wanted to talk about the basics and getting back to basics on things. So basically, we wanted to talk about rods and reels, line, baits, rigs, that kind of stuff. The basics of surf fishing and inshore fishing. Can you just give us a basic breakdown of what you were saying earlier was just you a lot of us go out there, get spooled, have a fish break off or whatever, and we reevaluate our gear and kind of look to beef it up some. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. You go out and it's a learning process from start to whenever. It's always a learning process. I've been doing this 10 years now, and I go out every day when I go fishing. I learn something new.
Right.
You got to be open to that.
Sure.
But no, as far as rods go, you've got basically two different kinds of rods. You got spinning and you've got casting. Spinning being the larger eyes, casting being the smaller eyes. And from there you have, different rod lengths, different rods, sizes, different rod weights. Obviously if you're going to be going for larger game fish, you want to be going with a heavier rod, and but you don't want to go with a broomstick, so to speak. And then you start getting into, as far as I'm concerned, I like casting. I'm a casting guy. I've got a couple of spinning rods for my nephew or for friends or whatever that I can bring with, but primarily, as far as my personal preference, is I prefer casting gear.
Okay.
And I also prefer a graphite comp, which is a graphite and fiberglass composite. It's a combination of the two, and you get the best of both worlds. You get strength from the graphite, mm-hmm. and then you also get flexibility from the fiberglass.
Sure.
So it's the best of both worlds. So, but some guys prefer all glass rods, like ugly sticks. Most of the ugly sticks, your 10s and 12s, are all glass, and those are nice rods. But unfortunately, I've blown up an ugly stick before, so I tend to go with different types of rods now. Over the course of several years, my actual go-to rod is a very inexpensive rod, and it's what's called a Daiwa beef stick.
Okay.
I love the way they load up. It's I believe a graphite comp rod, and it's a casting. You can get them in casting or spinning, but the that particular rod is, like I said, inexpensive. They have really good backbone to them, and I've never broke one. So I basically look at it. If it's not broke, don't fix it.
Sure, I get that.
So anyway, and then you get into your reels, your spinning reels, and your casting reels, and that. And there's a plethora of casting reels out there. I'm not gonna, say one's better than the other one. One thing you want to look at is if you're new to the casting reel genre, then you probably want to get a magnetic drag on it. I know several reel manufacturers offer that on their larger casting reels, 30s, 40s, 50s. Some do, some don't. I been fishing with casting reels most of my life, so I don't really have a whole lot of use for them. But casting into the wind can be a different story because you get a lot of some people call them bird nests, some people call them backlashes. For me, it's a professional overrun.
Professional. Never heard it called that before. That's great.
So
professional
that's what
overrun.
I call it, professional overrun. So anyway, what do you call it? When you're casting into the wind, it a lot of times it does help to have a magnetic drag on it, so you don't backlash the reel. So anyway, you're with in the last 10-15 years, with the advent of spectra and braids, and that your super braids, you can get a lot more capacity on a reel using a combination of braid and mono. I typically use the Jerry Brown braid. That's the one I prefer. It's a smoother, more supple braid. It's not as hard on the eyes of the rod, and it's incredibly strong, as strong as any of them. The mono I prefer is from AFW. It's called Grand Slam, and I use what they call Grand Slam Quattro, which is a 4-color mono. It changes every few inches to different colors. Therefore, it breaks it up underwater, and it's less likely to be seen by by game fish.
Sure. And that's one of the things you make rigs for, is for big game fish that are wary, competitors out there, when it comes to getting out there with the heavy hard hitters, right?
That's correct.
No, that's great. So that's the basics on line, rod, and reel. Tell us a little bit about rigs and what kind of rigs you prefer to use, and that's especially for the inshore and your heavy hitter inshore fish. And you may be on a kayak, you may be surf fishing, you may be in a bay boat. But what's your viewpoint on that?
What I found works best for me. Now, everybody's got their preference. What works for me is a combination of mono and cable. Like I said earlier, I don't like to use the piano wire, the single strand wire, because it's hard on the fish, and another, it's hard on your hands.
Well, and you can compromise it too by bending it too much and that kind of stuff. Am I right about that?
That's right.
Okay.
If you bend it, it decreases the capacity of that wire.
Sure.
And it can actually break off on you. Like I said, I normally use monos and cables, a combination of the two. I use cable down by the fish where it counts. So if you get a shark on or something toothy, it doesn't cut the line. And I use mono up above the cable to put this floating swivel on. A lot of guys down here use what they call fish finder rigs, and it's similar to that, where you have a floating swivel along the mono, and that's where you put your weight. But the mono, once you cast it out a few times, if your rig was all cable, the weight, which is usually 6 to 8 ounces, tends to bend the cable right above the. A lot of guys put a crimp sleeve on the cable as a weight stop, and once you kink the cable, it loses strength capability. So
Right.
you compromise the strength of the cable. Therefore, I use mono.
Hmm.
The mono is a lot heavier. It's 300-pound mono or 200-pound mono, and it has relatively no effect on it. And so you get the best of both worlds. And then also, except for the hooks, now I do use some black hooks, but they're what do you call it? Black nickel coated. But all the hardware I use is all black. I don't like anything shiny on my gear.
You mentioned that on the last show. I'm starting to remember this now, and I need to go back and listen to that podcast, and I'll put that in the show notes. But I remember you had a reason for having everything black.
Yeah, because game fish will go after shiny objects.
Hmm.
And if you're using something shiny like a nickel plated or gold plated, this, that, or the other swivel, snap swivel, whatever, fish can go after that, and then they go after your rig instead of the bait.
Instead of the bait, yeah, and that's where the rubber meets the road, because if you get them on the rig, then you're not going to get them on the hook, and that's where it counts. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Well, I try to keep on everything I build. I try to keep the focus on the bait,
Right.
and so that's what I want the fish or the potential predator, big game fish to focus on, is the bait and nothing else.
Sure.
And so that's why I build everything with black hardware. And some of the new rigs I'm building now, the HD Shark rigs and some of the deep drops are built with black mono. It's not a smoke mono; it's a jet black.
Huh.
And so it does not reflect light underwater, and it blends in better with the sand bottoms, because there's all kinds of dead plant matter in that, and it's all black. So
Huh. That's cool. That's really cool. And one of the rigs I remember that you made when we got together and that you showed me, or either you brought to me or you showed me a photo of, is one you call like a striper rig. It's like an inshore rig that you basically on the weight you actually have your bait hanging off of. Is that still something you do?
yes, I still do the striper rig. Basically, your striper rig is so you can use most of the rigs I build for surf fishing, and that you can
Right.
use. They're built for spider weights.
Okay.
Now,
Okay. Spider
I
weights. That's
built
what I was trying to say. Spider weights. Yeah, that's right.
well, I built the striper rig for a certain area of the country, which is the Northeast, and guys up there like to fish striper, and they don't use spider weights in that neck of the woods because of the bottom. It's more rocky, more shell,
I see.
instead of being mud and sand like it is down here on the coast. And being it's more rocky and more shell bottom, your spider weights are going to get hung, and you're going to lose rigs a lot quicker with the spider weight than you would use with a teardrop weight.
Right. Right.
Or what's referred to as a bank sinker.
Uh-huh.
And so I built those for use with bank sinkers, or any other kind of weight that doesn't have legs on it,
Right.
like spider weight. So I actually put a little J hook. It's mounted on the mono part of the rig, the heavy mono, and you can actually hang your bait on that little tiny J hook instead of hanging it on the spider weight, which you would normally hang on one of the coastal rigs.
Sure.
So you can fish them from the boat, you can fish them from shore, but it also, what it does, it keeps the bait and the weight in a little compact package. So when you're casting it out, you don't lose distance because of your bait and weight helicoptering in midair.
Right, right. Which makes a lot of sense, because we've all been there that's fished even freshwater, where your bait kind of helicopters out there in the wind, and the wind catches it and blows it one way or the other or whatever. But this keeps it all in one tight package. I think that's smart. Even do people use those? And I've asked you this before, but I can't remember the answer. Do people use those for catfish and striper and things like that, and in freshwater?
Oh yes,
okay.
Oh yes. They use them for catfish. They use them for striper. Some guys also use them for sturgeon. But the only difference in the sturgeon is that I order a special barbless hook from
yeah, because of the laws, right? Yeah.
And you can't fish for sturgeon with any hooks with a barb on it, so they have to be barbless. So I have special hooks that I use for folks that do fish sturgeon, and the rigs are plenty strong. like I said, with a 90-pound rig, I can, like I said, bend out, straighten out an 8/0 J hook,
Right.
and so they're plenty strong for any type of sturgeon. It's a 200-pound mono, and then on that particular rig, it's an 80-pound mono for your lower part of the rig, but you don't have anything toothy that can cut through it.
Yeah,
So
that makes sense. Wow. So this is also educational to me because I fish, some saltwater, just not a lot, and the more I look at, this kind of stuff is something I really want to get in more because I'm thinking of getting a sup board or some kind of a combination between a kayak and a sup and doing some bay fishing and some more freshwater fishing kind of in a small boat, small craft like that with if the water's calm and that kind of stuff. But one of the things I wanted to cover with you is baits. What do you use for what species typically?
for redfish, in the early spring and late fall, cut crab, fresh blue crab.
Okay.
You take and you leg it and shell it, and then basically cut it in half and run your hook through the leg, through one leg socket, out through the other,
Sure.
and you have two baits off of each crab.
Oh,
Now,
okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, sure.
um, you can also, and I've done it and caught reds on it and caught black drum. You can also use the claws. You run
Okay.
that. There's two sections on the claw. You have the main part of the claw where the actual claw is, and then you've got an upper part, like say the upper part of the arm, but you got an elbow in there in the middle, and you run your hook through that elbow,
Okay, I get it.
and then back out through the shell, which is pretty easy with a hook. It'll grind out pretty quick. You just kind of wiggle it a little bit, and it'll come back out through the shell. But then you take a pair of pliers and you tap on the shell just to crack it a little bit. And what it does, there's juice inside the shell, and it lets that juice come out, and that's what attracts the fish. But otherwise, in the spring, late spring, early summer, all throughout till early fall, basically whatever's in the surf is what I use for bait, because whatever's in the surf is what they're going to be eating.
Right, match the hatch kind of if you were a fly fisherman. Yeah,
Right,
whatever's
right.
there is whatever you want to offer to them, and that's good because the next thing I was going to ask you about sharks, but I mean a lot of this is even shark material too, is it not?
Yeah, I mean sharks will pretty much eat anything.
Right.
They're not real particular about what they want to eat. If they're out there and you've got bait in the water, they're gonna if they're hungry, they're gonna pick it up unless there's a ton of bait in the water, and they don't have to. They're scavengers to a point. They're opportunists, and they're also ambush predators. So they will, in most situations down here on the coast, the water's cloudy or um, it's not clear for the most part, and so you're going to have sharks browsing just on the other side of the sandbars in the little guts.
Right.
And so that's basically where you want to throw, is on the backside of the sandbar, because that's where they're going to be.
Right. That's where they're
And
going to be
like I
most
said,
likely to hook up with one. Yeah, that makes sense.
right, or further out, offshore. But I mean, when I go shark fishing, I'll go different distances out. I'll go, on the back of the second sandbar, on the back of the third sandbar, and then one out, 150, 200 yards, and then one out about 300 yards, just to find out where they're at.
And do
And
you weigh the baits out there, or do you kayak them out there, or do you just basically cast real long, or how do you do that?
it depends on what I'm using. If I'm
Sure.
using a regular shark rod with say a 6/0 and a boat, roller rod, it's going to get kayaked. You really
Okay.
can't cast those.
Right.
It's kind of, and then if I'm using a surf rod, sometimes I even kayak those out, but most of the
Sure.
time those get casted.
Okay. I was
So
just
that's
curious.
that's where you want the distance, and that's where the rig comes in, where you hang the bait. On all the rigs I build, the inshore rigs, all the shark rigs I build, other than the HDs, all the castable stuff, I put a larger loop at the hook, and as far as I can tell, I'm the only guy that does that. But it provides you a larger loop to hang on the spider weight, so when you do cast it out, you don't get it hung in the rig. It falls off the weight as soon as it hits the water.
Right. I get that. Oh, that's cool, and that makes a lot of sense. Just the setup of your thinking when it comes to designing these rigs, I think is just brilliant. And I say that about a lot of my guests, but who've invented something or come up with something or come up with a better mousetrap, if you will, because it in turn helps you put the bait where the fish want it and helps you land that fish, which is the ultimate goal, right?
That's correct. I mean, and one of the things that other things I use is you were asking about baits earlier, and
Sure.
I kind of touched on that.
Yeah.
I kind of want to go a little bit more into the baits.
Yeah. Sure.
It's whatever's in the surf. I'll go out there with a small rod, what they call a bait rod, a little spinning rod or a casting rod with little basically little the long J hooks,
Uh-huh.
but quarter-inch, eighth-inch gap on the hook, something very small. I use half a shrimp, and I'll chunk it out there, and whatever's biting, if you get whiting or piggy perch
Piggy
or
perch. Yeah, I was just gonna
grunts
say that. Yeah.
or whatever, and if I start catching croaker or whiting, then I'll slice that up and throw it on one of the surf rods, and that's what goes out.
Uh-huh.
But if I catch different things, and a lot of times I'll bring a cast net and catch a few finger mullet, catch some. If there's some horse mullet in the surf, I'll try to net a few of those.
Sure.
I'll use a plethora of different baits on the get-go to figure out what they're biting on.
Yep.
So, because one day they may like croaker, the next day they may like piggy perch. There's really no rhyme or reason to what they're biting on. It's just what they're preferring.
Right, that particular day. Sure, I get that.
Right.
Yeah, and that's the joy of fishing because you've got to figure all that out on the fly, while you're in the middle of it. No, that's good. I was just curious. So that's what you use for shark as well, because they can be finicky eaters sometimes, can't they?
Oh yeah, shark. Sometimes like I said, sometimes they want mullet. Sometimes they like. A lot of guys use stingray. A lot of guys for your larger sharks. A lot of guys use bonita, jack mackerel, ladyfish. All those are available at local bait stores. It depends on what the sharks are hungry for and if they're hungry.
Right.
Best time to catch sharks. Actually, the worst time to go wading is right at dusk and first thing in the morning, because that's when the sharks are feeding.
Okay, that's
That's
good to
when they're
know.
closest. That's when they're closest into shore, because that's when, like I said earlier, they're ambush predators and they're opportunistic predators.
Yes. They go where the bait is. And that's the
That's right.
interesting thing. I wanted to touch on it, especially on this show, because we touched on it basically in the show we did a couple of years ago. It's vitally important to be safe out there. And I want to touch on that before the show's over with, especially about how to handle a shark, how to handle a stingray. You sent me a photo the other day when we were just talking on the phone of a stingray stinger. And man, that scares the crap out of me. Those things are humongous. The one that you sent me from about 10 years ago that you got. So I think something like that when it comes to talking about saltwater fishing is vitally important as well.
Well, I mean, and safety is paramount. Like I said, that's one of the reasons I don't use the piano wire, the single strand wires, just for safety reasons for the fish and for the fishermen.
It's hard on your hands,
Um,
right? Yeah, that's what you were
yeah,
saying
it's,
earlier.
it
Yeah.
can be hard on your hands, even if you have gloves on. It can actually go through the gloves. So,
Wow.
um, the I'm not talking about the actual wire. I'm talking about the ends where it's twisted or whatever. You've got your haywire
Right.
twist,
Right. It's like a sharp
and
edge. Exactly.
it
Yeah.
is it is, and it can be very sharp. So, as far as safety goes, yeah, if you're going to be fishing in the surf, I wouldn't be out. If you're an hour or so after dark, that's one thing. But if you're going to be fishing right at dusk, be careful. Be very careful about know what your surroundings are, and it's really not worth it to go out there, especially if you're in Florida. Last year was a really the shark populations were really high last year inshore, and there were a lot of sharks, cruising the beaches and just off the beaches.
Right.
So be careful. Say an hour before dusk, or an hour before, like I said, dusk, an hour after dusk, an hour before daybreak, an hour after daybreak. I wouldn't be in the water myself.
Those
It's
are
just
peak
not. It's not.
times for
Yeah,
feeding
it's very.
shark. Okay.
Those are peak times for shark feeding, and most if you look at a lot of the shark attacks, a lot of them occurred during those times.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So the other thing is when you get a shark in, I mean, redfish and drum, they're pretty much, there's nothing really on them that can really hurt you, except for when you're trying to pick up a drum or redfish, try to pick it up around the where the gills meet at the underside of the fish.
Yes.
Not up in the mouth area, and not across the palate.
That needs to be said. Yeah, that for sure. Go ahead. Keep going.
What they do is they both feed on crustaceans. That's why they like crab, and they can take and crush a full grown crab or an oyster. They feed on oysters as well, and they can crush oysters with that palate. So if they can crush an oyster, they can make mincemeat out of your thumb or your fingers. So be very careful when you're picking them up, because a buddy of mine had that happen, and it basically, like I said, it crushed his thumb, lost his nail and everything, and it was pretty gross. But
yeah,
they're very very powerful, and that's it's hard cartilage in his mouth, and then on the bottom side, bone on the top. So just be real careful when you're trying to pick up a redfish. Also, when you're picking up reds, pick them up from the gills and the tail.
Yes.
Don't hold them straight up and down.
Right.
It's not good for the fish.
Right.
Try to hold them horizontally instead of vertically. If you catch a drum, say if you're out on a boat or whatever, fishing in any more than 10 feet of water, if you bring up a drum, you have to air the drum. In other words, you have to basically puncture the air bladder and let the air out so he can swim back to the bottom. There's plenty of websites or plenty of how-tos on that out on YouTube. So
well, and there's a product out there of a company that I've come in contact in my work in the advertising world, and that's Venefish, that makes basically a needle that is protected from the human hand, and basically just does its job to vent the fish, and so he can go back down and release and live a good life. But there are other tools in the market like that too. But that's one I wanted to mention. Venefish. It's kind of a specialty tool for something like that, for venting fish like that.
Right. Well, like I said, there's plenty of videos out there for you to watch where to vent them.
Yes.
It's basically, if you basically lay the pectoral fin, lay it on the side of the fish, and it's about an inch behind the pectoral fin, and you go in at an angle about a 45-degree angle from the tail towards the nose of the fish, and usually you'll hit it's not real hard to hit. So you just let them air out, and then you pull the needle out.
Right. No, that's good.
They'll heal up within a day or so, and it won't hurt them.
Yeah, be back to normal again. Yeah.
Right.
No, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's something you need to be concerned about with pulling those fish out of deep water. I know it's coast and inshore and bay fishing and stuff is very shallow and skinny water in a lot of regards. But if you ever get that out there with black drum and that kind of stuff, that's something to really keep in mind. I'm glad you mentioned that, Daryl.
You want to be as friendly to the the fish that you're catching. If you're not going to keep them, you want them to have the best chance of survival.
Right.
So
yeah, and you and I talked a lot on the last show we did about conservation, and about you've got some stuff on that you've come up with and posted different places about cutting your line after you take it off of the spool, cutting up mono and cutting up rigs and stuff like that to not rigs, but cutting up your line so it does not entangle nature in the future and that kind of stuff. And I think those kind of things are vitally important too.
Yeah, it is. There's a lot of fishing line. Some places that you do take the fishing line to, they say they recycle it, and some places I've seen that that line just ends up in a dumpster when the bin gets full. And some places actually recycle it. I would look for somebody that actually does before I drop it off in some bin somewhere. Yeah, the what you're talking about is is a spool that I retrofit with a bolt through it, and then cut one section of the spool out, sort of like a pie wedge out of the spool, and you mount that bolt on your cordless drill, and you can strip a 6/0 reel in a couple of minutes.
That's pretty cool. Yeah.
I like that. Strip all the mono up. but then you use a pair of cutters or whatever through that pie slice that's cut out of the spool,
Yes.
and you can get underneath the line and on top of the line, and you can basically cut it, and it just falls right off the spool once you cut through it
Right. And it's pretty
from one
much
side to
rendered
the other.
useless. Yeah, that way.
And
Right.
it's at that point it is useless, but it's also in less than 1 foot sections the entire spool, so
Yes.
it can't entangle anything because the line will go into the landfills, and there are predators, wolves and birds and all kinds of scavengers
Coyotes.
that go
Yeah.
out there, and you don't want them to get killed either.
No, I mean, and
So
that's the thing. Like for instance, and this is a very simple thing, but every time I get a 6 pack of soda or anything like that that has those rings on it, I'm always, I've learned this from when I was a little kid. Always cut those because they are going to end up in landfill, and a turkey buzzard could get wrapped around it, and die that way. And what an awful way to die. So I always am still teaching my son, who's 8, and everybody around me that I can reach about, hey, cut up your line after you're done with it. Don't just leave this stuff to chance because it can hurt some future wildlife, even in a landfill. That's a very good point.
yeah, and especially, I mean, your larger weights of mono, your anything 20 pound and up,
Sure.
basically. A lot of the 4 or 5 pound they can pull out of, but you get 20, 30 strands of it, and then they can't. So yeah, cut it up as much as you can before you throw it away. Yeah, conservation is something that is very important to me. If you're not going to keep the fish for eating or whatever, just let it go. There's no reason to kill it.
Sure.
And use hooks and tackle to in a way where it's beneficial for you to catch the fish, but it's also beneficial for the fish not to gut hook the fish or not to do any undue harm to the fish, while you're bringing it in.
And I'll even say this, even if it's a hardhead, because those can, if you kill those and throw them back in the water, those spine, the dorsal fin, can really hurt somebody if they step on it. I always try to be very careful when I'm dealing with hardhead catfish and gaff top and that kind of stuff that some people don't eat, and that are hard to clean or whatever, that you just don't discard those and be careless with them, because there's a lot of pain that they can inflict, live or dead.
Yeah, they are. They're the bad thing about hardheads is their spines. That's the 3 spines on it, the tri fins, if you will, are barbed on one side. And so they push in, but you can't pull them out. They have to be kind of surgically removed or pushed all the way through. And most people, when they get hit with a hardhead barb, it's usually just a nick.
Yes.
Usually just pokes you a little bit and then pops right back out. It doesn't go all the way in, but even those can be extremely painful because they do have a toxin on their fin.
That was the next thing I was going to mention. Yeah.
And the thing is, and it sounds weird, but it does work, and that is take the slime off the hardhead and rub it into the wound, and that will neutralize the toxin that's coming off the fin.
I learned that from you years ago, so I'll have you to thank for that. Yeah.
Yeah, it does work. So it works better than meat tenderizer or WD-40 or whatever else you've heard,
right?
Because they're immune to their own toxins.
Yes,
and they carry that immunity in the slime on their skin.
That is really interesting. I mean, how intricately designed all of nature is. I always bring that up, but I think that's kind of interesting. So the antidote's right there in the slime. Wow.
Yep, so, it is. And now you mentioned earlier stingrays. Be very careful with stingrays. Yes. Obviously, we know Steve Irwin met his demise at the hands of a big stingray, but it wasn't the stingray's fault. He just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and they can move their tails very, very quickly. They're incredibly strong as far as their tails, and barbs, as opposed to hardhead barbs, they're barbed on both sides.
Yes,
just like the picture that I sent you, Dustin.
Uh-huh. It's a pretty nasty picture. So it's pretty brutal.
But they've also got a toxin in their on their barb, which basically it's meant to deter predators from going after them, and it's one of their defenses. But yeah, if you get a stingray barb, make sure you cut it off from the stingray with a pair of wire cutters.
Right.
Just leave it wherever it is. Don't try to pull it out and go on to the hospital. But now I don't know if the hardhead slime works on the stingray barbs or not, but I've never
Some
tried
tells
that,
me it doesn't, but that's okay. You mean I have a hard head,
who
right?
knows? It may.
It might.
Who
That's
knows?
right. That's right.
But yeah, those are like I said, barbed on both sides, and you either have to push them all the way through, or they have to be surgically removed. Don't try to pull one out. Start pulling flesh.
Yeah, flesh and skin and everything else. And I was also going to ask you, I think, we're talking about safety a lot on this show. How do you handle a shark? What's the best way to handle a shark? Because I've caught some, but I've not successfully landed. We typically have cut them off at the boat or, whatever the case may be in some of the guide trips I've been at or broken off. What do you do when you want to keep a shark? I mean, how do you best handle that?
Well, if you're going to keep a shark, you should keep one between, say, 4 to 5 feet. 3 to 5 feet. That's probably the best table fare for pretty much any shark that you want to keep. The tastiest ones end up being your black tips and your sand sharks. They're pretty tasty when they're cooked correctly. You want to bleed them out if you're going to keep them, because the blood can taint the meat and make the meat taste really, really strong. Typically, what we do, and it's one of those where, you process the fish, and it's what we do is we cut the tail off.
Yes.
So the fish it'll go ahead and bleed out.
Right. Yeah.
But the thing is, if you're in a boat, you want to put it somewhere where the blood's not going to leach out or drain out of the boat into the water, because then you're just you'll have hundreds of sharks within,
You're asking for trouble.
Yeah, you're asking for trouble. So
it's a good way to say that.
Where it doesn't drain out of your boat. But go ahead and bleed the shark out, put it on ice, leave the head on it. You can gut it if you want to, but leave the head on, and then cut the tail off. But if you're not going to keep the shark, the best way of handling sharks under 3 feet, depending on how robust you are, how much body strength you've got. Because the sharks are very, very strong. They're unimaginably strong side to side as far as the tail movement.
They can slap you with that tail. Yeah, that's one thing you and I talked about before.
My brother's, he's 6'4" or 6'3", and he's a big dude. He couldn't take an 18-inch hammerhead that we caught out at 91st one time. He couldn't hold it still. If it moved, he couldn't hold it still.
Wow, yeah, they're strong.
It was that strong.
Yeah.
They're that strong.
Sure.
So up to 3 feet, what you want to do is you want to take and turn them over on their back. And it's what's called tonic immobility, and it immobilizes the shark. So the shark will just stop. It doesn't hurt them. It just immobilizes them.
Yes. Okay.
And so then you can get the hook out and have somebody else have a buddy or whatever get the hook out with a de-hooker. I recommend, if you haven't got one, get yourself an ARC de-hooker. They're great, they're strong, and they work real good on getting hooks out of sharks and hooks out of other fish. But you want to pull it from the front of them, out of the mouth, away from the mouth, and the opposite direction that the hook is into the shark. But have somebody hold the shark and then somebody else de-hook it.
Oh, that's good to know.
For your larger sharks, up, say 4 or 5 footer up, you're not going to want to pick them up and hold them. They're not too cuddly.
Yeah, they don't want to snuggle.
They're too heavy to hold upside down.
Yes.
So what you want to do is you want to leave them on the beach or the boat or whatever, and you basically either want to pin their head down, and for your larger sharks, your eights above 8 foot, 9 foot, 10 foot, you actually want to straddle the head in front of the dorsal.
Okay.
And just sit down on the shark. It's not going to hurt them. It'll keep them from moving. But once you do that, stay away from the tail.
Yes.
Because a 5 foot shark, if you have him pinned down on the beach and somebody's standing next to the tail and he goes to whip that tail, even a little 5 foot, 4 foot, 5 foot shark can break an ankle.
Uh-huh.
They're that strong.
They're viciously strong. Yeah, no, and that's one thing I learned about you as far as shark handling. I learned from you about shark handling is, it's just you can't ever be too careful. It's like gun safety, for heaven's sakes. It's just about taking care of each other that's out there, and taking care of that animal, or that shark or that fish that you want to let go. Conservation wise, but also just being uber safe. You just really can't be too safe around these creatures.
That's right. That's right. And obviously it goes without saying you want to stay away from the business end of the
Right.
shark.
Yes.
You don't want to you want to stay away from the teeth. Don't hold them by the mid body, because they can rotate their heads more than 90 degrees and get you.
And that's happened to a guy that I was with on the coast, Seadrift area, out on Port O'Connor area, and had a guide that told me a story that he had one by the tail and was lifting it out from underneath its body, and it reached around and caught him in the chest. And he said it wasn't that bad of a bite, but it just hurt like the dickens. But it literally got him, just because he wasn't paying attention of what that shark was capable of. So
Right.
that goes without saying. Yeah.
You're right. You're absolutely right. The best point to grab a shark, a smaller shark, is right behind the head.
Right. Right.
You
No,
want to
I've
grab
heard
it
that.
in
I've
front
heard
of
that. I'm still
in
learning
front
here,
of the
though.
dorsal fin.
Right.
Yeah, in front of the dorsal fin, right on top of the head. And just hold him, grip him tight, because and when you turn him over, he is going to thrash a little bit. You can keep one hand on the tail, one hand on his head,
Uh-huh.
and once he stops thrashing and he gets immobilized, then work on the hook.
Okay.
Your larger sharks, like I said, pin them down, something 7 foot, 8 foot, 9 foot, 10 foot, whatever. You can actually sit on their head, just in front of the dorsal fin, straddle them, and don't put all your weight on them, but enough to keep them pinned.
Right.
An easy way to do it is to put one knee on each of the pectoral fins.
The pectoral fins. Okay, cool. That's good to know.
And kind of hold them down, and that'll keep him from moving side to side. When he starts wiggling, he'll move his tail and not his head, but stay away from the tail, like I said earlier.
Yeah.
Do not hold the tail if you're going to hold the head of the shark, a large shark. And then have somebody else come around the front with, like I said, an arc hooker. Follow the line down to the hook. Have one person pull the leader back toward the back of the shark, and then have the other person pull the other direction with the arc hooker, and the hook should pop right out.
Okay, you've talked about this on our other show. I remember this, and I think that's probably the safest way to approach dehooking one,
right,
from any other way I've heard of.
Yeah, you don't want to get down there. Some guys will take in, if you can get them into the beach, there's no reason not to get that hook out.
Right.
All else fails and you just can't get it out if it's embedded too hard into his jaw, which can happen.
Sure.
Then you take and you cut the leader as close to the hook as you can.
Without getting into the business end too bad. Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. You just stay away from if you have the head pinned down, he's not got a lot of he can't move too quick, too much in either direction, so you can get pretty close to him. Just come from the back side of him. Don't come from the work from the tail toward the nose, not the nose toward the tail.
Right.
So
that's good. That's really good.
Anyway, yeah, and then the other thing with sharks, if you ever catch a hammerhead shark, try to get him into the beach as quickly as possible.
Uh-huh.
That's another thing I'm going to kind of touch on is shark mortality.
Sure.
Hammerheads, different from any other shark because they will actually fight to the death. If you play a shark out, it's a hammerhead. If you play him out and he comes in willingly, 99% chance he's dead because he has fought as much as he's got nothing left.
Right.
So you want to get, if you can identify the hammer, which a great hammer, you'll have a really large dorsal fin, a really high dorsal fin, higher than any other shark. If you can identify him, get him into the beach quick because if you, like I said, if you play him out, by the time you get him in, he's going to be dead, literally.
Wow.
The rest of them, your bulls and tigers and that, you can play them out to a point and get them in. But once you get them on the beach, try to keep them in the where the water can still get to them. Don't put them way up on the beach. Put them where the waves can still lap over them.
Yep.
not necessarily waves, but few inches of water, and then that way it does put water on their gills while you're
Circulates
getting
that
them.
water in the gills.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's what I was just gonna say. That's smart.
the faster you can get them unhooked, get them up on the I say on the beach, but into an area where they can still breathe to a point. The faster you can do that, the better. It's once you get them on the beach, it's not time to go get the camera out of the truck. The camera should already be ready,
Yeah.
and you unhook them. If you're going to tag them, tag them. There's any number of places where you can get tagging kits.
Sure.
And tag them by the dorsal fin, and then release them, get them back out into the surf, and get them back out to where they can swim off.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
But
I'm glad we talked about that, because I didn't really think the show would go that way. But I mean, it's quite valuable advice if you've never handled one before, or even if you have. It's kind of sound advice of something that could happen that maybe hasn't happened to you yet. So yeah, I think that's really good to discuss.
well, I mean, a lot of guys will go over how to catch them, but there's not a lot of information out there on, okay, we got one, what do we do with it now?
Yeah, that's right.
So
This is a beast. Yeah.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, and they can be they're wild animals. Don't treat them as puppy dogs.
Right.
They're not.
Yeah, they're mean.
You treat them as carefully, respect them, but respect the fact that they can take an arm or a leg.
Right.
You handle them if you handle them the right way,
Yep.
keep all your body parts always behind the mouth. Don't put them in front.
Right.
Because they can lunge and they can twist.
Right.
So
right. No, that's good.
So anyway, your smaller sharks, flip them over. Your larger sharks, basically pin them down.
Pin them down on the head. Yeah.
Stay away from the tails on your larger sharks.
No, that's good to know. That's really good to know. And overall, I mean, are there any particular brands that you stick to besides your own brand of rig, obviously? Are there any particular outdoor brands that you're kind of fond of that you fish with more than others? I'm just curious if that's okay to ask.
Well, I really don't want to say, one way or the other, which I like the Arc dehooker.
Sure.
That's an ARC. That works really good for me. The less there's small dehookers out there that you can buy for hardheads, and I would highly recommend them.
Just to have on site, right? Yeah.
Yeah, just to have them. I try not to touch hardheads at all. I'll use a dehooker on a hardhead as much as possible, so I don't have to touch them. And
because you will catch hardheads if you fish, especially cut bait in the surf. I mean, it's pretty much going to happen. So
yeah. And typically, if hardheads are biting, typically there's not much else biting.
Right. That's another good point to make.
So you might as well hang it up.
Yeah. No, that's good to know.
But no, as far as AFW, those are I use their cables and monos in the gear that I build. Their swivels, their sleeves, mustads. I use mustad and owner hooks.
Okay. Mustad.
Those are basically the only two I like to use. That's about it as far as brands.
I was just curious. I mean, I just there's certain brands, like I prefer a Mustad in a lot of ways for saltwater. I just wanted to kind of go over. There's so many brands out there, just to kind of see somebody that's in the professional rig building world, what you like to use, because I think that helps our listeners kind of shop better. But they're all. I mean, that's the thing about, and I said this ad nauseum on the show, but we're in the golden age of all this, man. The gear is getting better, and it's already better than it ever was last year. I mean, it just really is continuing to expand, in a lot of ways.
It is, and it's the trend is now is getting lighter and stronger.
Yes.
Because if the reels that guys are using nowadays are much smaller than the ones they were using even 5 years ago.
Right.
Their gear ratios are higher. You have a small reel that's the size of a bass reel now with a handle that you would use on an offshore reel, and they work great.
Built for heavy duty business.
Well, yeah, because you have the advantage of super braids now, which take up much less room than monos do on a reel, and it's just one of those. But there's certain things that you don't use braid for, and that's one thing. You don't lay braid on the sand because it will sand will eat it up.
The abrasives, right?
That's why, yeah. That's why you use a shock leader or use mono on the sand. You don't use braid in high impact situations
Mm-hmm.
because it can break rods. It usually doesn't break the braid, but it can at 26 pounds of drag. You have that much drag on a rod, and you have a wahoo hits it or something like that. 110-pound person, you pull you right out of the boat.
Yeah, that's a good
You want
point.
that little bit of shock as far as mono goes because it does stretch. It gives you a little bit of a shock, like a shock absorber on your
Right.
line.
Right. That's good
So,
to know too. I've always wondered why you like mono so much for that reason, and that does make a lot of sense right there.
well, the other thing is that mono cable's more expensive,
Yes.
and to keep the cost down, I use a combination of mono and cable, and not to mention I do sell all cable rigs, but those are mostly for offshore.
Right. Right. Deep sea and big game. Yeah.
Right, big
Right.
game, and my fella just I built some shark rigs for him about a month ago. He's out on the coast of North Carolina, and he's one of the few people, actually the only person I know that goes out and does fishes for great whites with rod and reel.
Hmm.
And he actually pulled about a 1,300-pound female, got her up to the boat with some of the gear that I sent him. It's 400-pound mono, the
Oh
black mono I was telling you about earlier,
man.
single crimped, with stainless swivels and stainless snaps.
Mm-hmm.
And the upper part of the rig is a permanent part of the rig, and then the lower part of the rig, it's got a 600-pound snap on it, and you can interchange whether you want to run cable or you want to run like him in his case. He has to run piano wire because the great white will chew through the
Oh
cable.
yeah, yeah, I've heard that too. I mean, they're just massive beasts, and we've talked about great whites on the show too. But for somebody to use a rig of your making, on a great white shark, I mean, that's got to make you feel proud. So
Well, it's nothing that I it was just waiting for somebody to do it.
right, somebody to accomplish that goal. Yeah, I get what you're
Right,
saying. Yeah.
right. I mean, 8 years ago we towed a truck with it. It's on my Facebook page. If you look at the one of the videos on my Facebook page, it shows my green Tundra towing an Xterra,
Oh my gosh,
and
another full size vehicle. That's great.
and that's with a 300-pound. It's a 300-pound mono, 600-pound cable, single crimped shark rig.
That's
And
awesome.
that's the same one that if somebody orders the $20 shark rig from me, the HD, that's what they get. So
Golly,
I
that's
still build
great.
them to this day. You can get a heavier one or a longer shark rig. And that's one thing I kind of wanted to mention earlier
Sure.
is in the building of the rigs that I do, all my gear is variations of the same rig. And it's either heavier mono, lighter mono, heavier cable, lighter cable, uh, and different lengths and different hooks.
Right.
But it's basically the same. You have an upper parts mono, the lower parts cable, and it's the best of both worlds. You get really good durability, but you also get very good, very high strength.
Right. No, that's great. That's what you really want out of a good rig. Tell us how to find you, order your rigs, that kind of stuff.
I'm on eBay. Just look up Double D Extreme Tackle on eBay. Also, if you look up castable shark rigs on that's an easy way to do it on Google, or you can just Google Double D Extreme, and my website will pop up.
Great. And you've got a Facebook page. People can connect with you. I'll put that in the show notes
Yes,
as
I've got a
well.
Facebook page. It's Double D Extreme Tackle. It's actually off my page. Like I said, my name's Daryl Palmer,
Uh-huh.
and my number is 281-804-9829. I answer phone calls anywhere from 8 in the morning till nine or so at night.
Oh, that's
So if you
great.
want to call me just to chit chat, there's been plenty of guys that have called up. Hey, I'm going here. What should I use? And like I said earlier, I don't know everything, but I know a little bit,
Right.
and I'll try to steer them in the right direction. I had a client come out of Mexico City last year, He comes up to Florida every year because the beaches down there, I guess, are too dangerous with all the cartels and that.
Yes.
So he comes up to Florida to go fishing, and they put with the information that I gave him, going from zero to almost almost a seasoned shark fisherman. They put a nice 8-foot bull on the beach.
Wow.
And they were elated between him and his brother and his brother-in-law.
That's great. No, that's
they
wonderful.
They all got him in, got him released safely, and they were elated.
Oh, that's great. What a story. And that's the thing about you that I've always liked. And I don't even remember how we met. I think it was on LinkedIn or something years ago. But I mean, the thing that I've always liked about you is how accessible you are and how much knowledge that you've imparted on me about saltwater and especially big game saltwater fishing. And that's what I really want to dive more into in this show series is that kind of stuff. So I really appreciate your time today.
Well, you're welcome, Dustin. And it's always a pleasure talking with you. And we're, I think we've been friends for quite a long time.
Yes.
And I think we're going to, stay friends for a very long time because we're like you said, you're accessible just like I am.
Sure.
All I have to do is pick up the phone and call you. And same thing with the clients that I have, is if you need to talk or just want to, shoot the breeze about fishing, give me a holler. I'll talk to you for hours about
that's
fishing.
Great. That's the thing I've always liked about you. That's
great.
Have,
and if the thing is, and one thing I do tell the folks that do call in, if you're ever on the beach and you got phone access, you get in a jam, call me. I'll do my best to talk you through it.
Right. That's another great asset
of
knowing you.
Yeah. A lot of the situations I've been in, or have had friends that have been in, and I can, if you get into a situation where you're not sure what to do, holler at me.
Right.
I'm pretty much available. If it's 3 a.m, if it's something that's important, I'll answer it and I'll talk to you.
Oh, that's great. That's so awesome. So.
But yeah, I am very accessible. I don't like calling into a company and needing to ask a question and be put off by some put off here or put off there and they're not available or that type of thing, and that's not the way I run my company.
Oh, that's great.
I take pride in the customer service rating that I have, which is 100%.
Yeah.
I've never had to field a complaint, and I don't intend to because I make sure that everybody's questions are answered and that they know what's going on.
That's wonderful.
And if they don't, they've always got my number.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, we better end it here. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. And there he goes, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Daryl Palmer from Double D Extreme Tackle. Really great guy. Really enjoyed having him on the show, and really fun conversation that we had about saltwater fishing and fish safety and handling fish and that kind of stuff, especially on some of those more dangerous fish that can hurt you. So anyway, really look forward to doing another show with him in the future, and we'll talk more about offshore and big game fishing. We'll talk about more inshore bay fishing and that kind of stuff in the future, and there'll be some really great topics we can cover. I wanted to cover shark fishing now because it's January when this show is airing, going live, I guess you could say, in 2018. Sharks really don't get active until March, but I at least wanted to get the information out there, especially if we rebroadcast this podcast again, just so people are have a heads up on what to expect if they catch a shark, or a hardhead or a gaff top or a stingray or anything like that we talked about in the show, just to know what to expect, what to do if you catch one of those. So I just wanted to kind of get that information out there as we start the new year, as we look forward to shark season in the Gulf and elsewhere around the world, when they start coming in closer to where we can catch them. So anyway, thank you so much again for watching, reading, and listening. Thank you so much for telling a friend about the show, and have an awesome day in the outdoors. We'll see you next time.